Have you ever watched a child, maybe your own, maybe a niece or nephew, just staring at a blank wall? Not in a vacant, lost way, but with an intensity that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. You ask them, "What are you looking at?" And they turn to you with eyes that seem older than time itself, and they say something impossible. A sentence that doesn't fit in a child's mouth. Maybe they tell you about a city made of white stone that reached the clouds, a city that hummed with a silent energy. Maybe they describe a feeling, a lingering memory of a world without engines, without smoke, a world powered by the very song of the earth. A world they call Tartaria. You laugh it off, a child's imagination, a dream they're confusing with reality. But deep down, in a place you don't like to visit, it feels familiar. Like a chord struck on a piano you didn't know was in the room. You feel the echo of that white city in your bones. You dismiss it because you have been conditioned to. You have been schooled to. But what if I told you that the school itself was the instrument of that dismissal? Not the modern school of today, but the first schools, the ones that sprang up like orderly brick and mortar weeds in the 19th century. What if their primary purpose wasn't to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, but to erase something, to overwrite a memory? Today, we're going to explore one of the most suppressed and mind-bending theories in alternative history. A theory that suggests the orphan trains, the sudden explosion of compulsory education, and the architectural impossibilities of our own cities are all connected by a single, terrifying thread. The theory that the children who remembered Tartaria were the first ones put in schools. This isn't just a story about a lost empire. It's a story about a war waged on the human soul, a war that started with the children. And to understand it, we have to go back to the very moment the world forgot. Stay with me. We need to start with a simple, devastating question. Look at any major city in the world. Look at the old world architecture. The buildings built supposedly for the 1,893 Chicago World's Fair, the palaces in St. Petersburg, the cathedrals in Europe, the sprawling, ornate structures in San Francisco before the fire. Official history tells us these were built by horse and cart, by masons with hand tools in a span of a few years, often on mud flats, often with no infrastructure. They are buildings of impossible scale, adorned with perfect geometry, covered in what looks like sacred technology, spires that act as antennas, domes that channel energy, columns that are always in perfect resonance. Now, imagine a child born into the 1860s or 1870s, a child whose parents or grandparents whispered stories, a child who, in a deep state of reverie, could access a collective memory field. This child would walk through one of these new cities, maybe London after the Great Exhibition, maybe New York, and they wouldn't just see a building. They would see a phantom limb. They would feel the resonance of a world they never lived in, but inherently knew. They would point to a colossal stone structure with a Roman-style dome and ionic columns and say that was a healing center. The water that flowed through the copper wires in the walls could mend bones. They would point to a grand railway station, built like a temple to the gods, and say, we didn't need the metal tracks. The wheels hovered on the frequency of the stone. They would look at the great cathedrals, not as places of a newly standardized religion, but as something else. That's where we went to listen to the earth's song and recharge our bodies. This wasn't a fantasy. To them it was a memory. They possessed what we now awkwardly call DNA memory, or ancestral resonance, but which the mystics of the old world simply knew as the knowing. The knowing was a natural connection to the unified field, the Akashic records, the morphic resonance of a planetary civilization that had just been wiped out. A mud flood, a reset. A cataclysm so profound that it left entire cities buried to the second story in mud. The survivors walking around as amnesiacs in a land of giants, plugging their oil lamps into the walls of buildings that were already there, buildings they didn't understand, and who were the purest conduits for the knowing. The children, They hadn't had their pineal glands fully calcified by fear, by fluoride, by a processed diet. Their third eye was still wide open. They remembered Tartaria not as a history lesson, but as a lived reality from just 1 or 2 incarnations ago, or perhaps from a timeline that was still bleeding into our own. A farmer in Kansas in 1870 might find his 5-year-old daughter tracing complex geometric patterns in the dirt. A pattern that, if you overlay it on a map of the constellations, unlocks a free energy blueprint. The daughter would say, "Papa, why doesn't this work anymore? The light from the rods doesn't dance." The farmer, a practical man, would see nonsense. But to the child, the absence of the dancing light, the ambient etheric energy that once powered everything, was a profound, sad, and disorienting loss. These children were like human tuning forks still vibrating at the frequency of the old world, placed into the silent, dead air of the new. And their humming was starting to cause a problem for the architects of the reset. Because if enough people listened to the children, the grand deception would fail. The inheritors of the world, the ones who had orchestrated the mud flood to wipe the Tartarian slate clean and claim the land as their own, needed these memories to die. But you can't just kill an entire generation of children without drawing attention. You need a more elegant solution. You need a prison, you need a system, you need a school. We have been taught that compulsory schooling was a progressive, benevolent gift to humanity, a way to lift the masses out of ignorance. But the timeline tells a different, darker story. The push for mandatory state-run education exploded exactly when these orphan children of a fallen empire were threatening to remember. We're talking about the Factory Acts, the Prussian model of schooling, the sudden construction of massive, prison-like institutions all across the Western world between 1850 and 1900. Let's dissect the very word, school. It derives from the Greek skol, meaning leisure, but that's a linguistic trick. In the old world, to be schooled was to be initiated into the mysteries, to learn how to perceive the ether. The new system inverted its meaning. Now, schooling was not about inner illumination, but outward obedience. The first target was the orphan. Think about the sheer number of displaced children after the cataclysm. The orphan trains in America are a perfect example. Between 1854 and 1929, an estimated 250,000 orphaned or abandoned children were loaded onto trains in eastern cities and shipped out to the Midwest and West. This wasn't just charity, it was a systematic gathering of the most vulnerable psychics, the children without parents to tell them, "Hush, don't speak of the old things." The official story is that their parents died in epidemics, but what if the epidemic was the cataclysm itself, and these children were the last generation born into the etheric age? These children, carrying the purest memories of Tartaria, were the first in line. They were gathered up and delivered into a system designed to destroy their identity. And this system had a godfather, John D. Rockefeller. The Rockefeller General Education Board, founded in 1902, stated its mission with shocking clarity in a document called Occasional Letter No. 1 from 1906. The quote is chilling. "In our dreams, people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. We are going to standardize the children of America by means of the school. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children philosophers, scholars, or natural scientists. We will create a generation of workers." But what was the raw material they were molding? It wasn't blank slates, it was etched stone tablets from a previous epoch. The content of the curriculum itself is the smoking gun. Why did they teach us that history started with cavemen and suddenly lurched into civilization with the Greeks and Romans, ignoring thousands of years of intricately documented global culture? Why did they teach us that the magnificent ether-based architecture all around us was built with primitive tools? It was a smear campaign against memory. When a Tartarian child sat in a classroom and was told the world was powered by steam and coal, their inner knowing screamed, "No, its resonance and piezoelectric crystals in the cathedral spires. When the teacher pointed to a map and said, "This is the Russian Empire," the child's blood remembered, no, that was the unified Tartarian continent, the land of the great Khan where we lived in peace. This created a massive psychological loop of cognitive dissonance. The child's inner world was being labeled as a lie. Every time they believed the teacher, a piece of their Tartarian self died. This was spiritual murder on an industrial scale. And for the children who wouldn't comply, the ones who threw a tantrum because the math didn't work the way it used to, because in the old math, numbers had color and sound and could bend reality. They weren't just punished with a dunce cap or a ruler on the knuckles. That was the superficial, exoteric punishment. The esoteric punishment was far more sinister. They were labeled as possessed, hysterical, or insane. They became the first patients of the burgeoning psychiatric industry, a parallel system that grew hand in hand with the schools. The asylums of the late 19th century, those massive Kirkbride plan buildings, were filled with adults, yes, but a shocking number of troublesome youths. Youths who wouldn't stop drawing star forts and free energy circuits in their notebooks. The school and the asylum became the two arms of the memory police. Let's go deeper into the mechanism of forgetting. How do you actively erase a global memory from the collective consciousness? You can't just tell people to forget. You have to change their biology. You have to calcify the very organ of perception, the pineal gland. The children who remembered Tartaria had functional pineal glands. In the old world, this tiny, pinecone-shaped crystal in the center of the brain was the primary interface with reality. It received etheric information. The new rulers of the world knew that to fully control the population, they had to turn this biological antenna into a useless lump of stone. How? The four pillars of pineal assault. First, the food. The industrialized diet was introduced. White flour and refined sugar, stripped of all life force, flooded the market. But the primary weapon was fluoride, not just in the water, which came later, but in the very architecture of forgetting. The factories that produced the food were also spewing out sodium fluoride, a toxic waste product from aluminum and fertilizer production. Dumping it in the rivers was killing the fish, and the elites were getting sued. The solution, a medical miracle. They rebranded industrial toxic waste as a cavity-fighting health supplement. But here's what the dental establishment won't tell you. Fluoride is the ultimate pineal calcifier. It accumulates in the gland with a magnetic attraction, literally crystallizing the soft, receptive tissue into hard, dead calcium phosphate. A calcified pineal gland cannot receive the subtle vibrations of the knowing. It's like putting a lead blanket over a radio antenna. Every meal these Tartarian children ate in the school canteen was a spoonful of spiritual amnesia. Second, the architecture of sound. The old world was a world of sacred sound. Tartarian buildings were not built in dead acoustic silence. They were resonators designed for the frequency of 432 Hz, a healing frequency mathematically aligned with the geometry of the earth and the human body. It opened the heart and activated the third eye. The new system retuned the world. The Rockefeller Foundation heavily influenced the standardization of musical pitch, pushing the world towards 440 Hz. This frequency, as argued by many researchers, is dissonant with the human bio-field. It causes stress, anxiety, and a clenching of consciousness. School bells, the national anthem, the music played in the assembly hall, all of it was a weaponized frequency cage, subtly traumatizing the children's cellular memory and making the 432 Hz hum of Tartaria feel alien and uncomfortable. Third, the lighting. We've all heard the buzz of a fluorescent light in an old school. That's not just an electrical noise, it's a flicker rate. These early electric or limelight gas lamps and later fluorescents flickered at a frequency of 50 or 60 Hz. The human brain, in a state of calm awareness, operates on alpha waves 8-12 Hz and theta waves 4-8 Hz. A strobe effect of 60 Hz forces the brain into a higher beta state of constant low-grade anxiety. A child's brain, forcibly kept in a stressed beta state, cannot daydream. And daydreaming, the wandering of the mind into the theta state, is the very sanctuary where the memories of Tartaria lived. The lighting system was a wall erected around their own subconscious. Finally, the fourth pillar, the most direct assault, the content itself. We talk about the 3 R's of reading, writing, arithmetic, but look closely. Reading was not about reading the divine book of nature. It was a phonetic-based left, brain-dominant, mechanical decoding that separated the symbol from its sacred meaning. Writing was not the flowing, artistic expression of the soul. It was repetitive, cursive drill, a mechanical, hand-cramping act of obedience. The Palmer method wasn't about beautiful communication. It was a factory, floor training for the body, a trance-inducing, will-breaking repetition. And math? They swapped the sacred, living geometry of the old world for a dead, linear, decontextualized arithmetic. A Tartarian child perceived number as quality, a symphony of proportion, the golden mean, the Fibonacci sequence, which was the language of creation itself. The new math isolated quantity as a dead abstract symbol. To make a child solve 7 times 8 is to force their brain to ignore the geometric dance those numbers represent. It was a lobotomy by long division. But here is the glorious failure of the plan. You cannot kill the soul. You can only bury it so deep that it becomes a seed. And seeds, when watered, crack through concrete. The entire system of compulsory schooling almost worked. For 3 or 4 generations, the memory of Tartaria went from a living, breathing reality to a whisper, to a ghost story, to a psychiatric disorder. By the 1950s, the whitewashed nuclear, family, consumer, culture zombie was fully operational. History was a flat line from a cave to a suburb, and the magnificent ruins of the old world were just odd follies, our ancestors apparently built without power tools for no reason. But the resonance wouldn't die. It was stored in the very DNA helix, coiled like a sleeping serpent. And something is waking it up, the electromagnetic pulse of the digital age, for all its control mechanisms, is paradoxically reactivating the memory. Children born today, the indigo children, the crystal children, are showing up with a natural resistance to the calcification protocols. They instinctively know 2 + 2 = 4 is a lower dimensional truth. They are Elias reincarnated, coming back with the blueprints in their aura. Look at the explosion of this information. The term Tartaria was confined to esoteric whisper networks just 10 years ago. Now, millions of people are looking at a picture of the Transamerica pyramid next to a Russian Orthodox church spire and saying, "Wait a minute, that's the same technology." People are measuring the resonant frequency of cathedral naves. People are unearthing maps from the 18th century that show a unified, vast empire called Tartary stretching across the old world. They are looking at the Great Reset of the 21st century and recognizing the playbook, a mud flood of digital currency, an architectural erasure of our history, a push to move children from the home into a virtual, Metaverse school, where their reality can be programmed perfectly this time, with no messy biology to fight back. The children who remembered Tartaria were the first ones put in schools. That was phase 1, the reset. Phase 2 is happening right now. The children who are remembering Tartaria again, the ones drawing star forts and talking about past lives in a crystalline city, are being targeted, not with orphan trains, but with a different kind of abduction, the smartphone, the tablet, the 6G frequency cage. They are being hypnotized into a digital matrix so that they never look up at the real architecture around them. They are being schooled from birth on a curated, synthetic reality, so they never discover their own inner ether. But there's a key difference between 1872 and today. In 1872, the children were alone. They were isolated in a prairie schoolhouse, their only witness a terrified, indoctrinated adult. Today, the children have the internet, and the adults, the ones who were once those lonely children, are waking up too. The numbness that Elias felt, the nameless sadness that is lifting. We are beginning to feel the phantom limb of Tartaria again. And the recognition is a chain reaction. You see a building in your city, a post office with a massive dome and an antenna that seems to have no practical purpose, and the child within you, the one they tried to kill in 4th grade math, whispers, "I remember this." So the question we must ask ourselves is not, did Tartaria exist? The proof is in the architecture, in the maps, in the hauntingly empty, buried first floors of every 19th century city on Earth. The question is, what do we do now that we are remembering? The first schools were prisons for children who could see. The modern rediscovery is the great escape. To free yourself, you must understand the program that was installed in you. Your inability to sit still, your craving for sugar, your addiction to the hum of the 440 Hz world. These are not personal failings. These are the factory settings of a system designed to drown out the memory of a golden age. The homogenization of culture, the flattening of our history, the erasure of the sacred feminine and the healing arts. It was all part of the same curriculum, a curriculum written in the ashes of a global empire. The children who remembered Tartaria were the first ones put in schools. And in those schools, they were taught that they were nothing but a number in a ledger, a cog in an industrial machine. But that machine is running out of fuel. The mud that they poured over the old world is drying up, and the gleaming spires of the true civilization are breaking through the surface once again. You are the child who remembered. Whether you are 8 or 80, the moment you question the impossible architecture, the moment you feel a surge of recognition at a 432 Hz healing frequency, the moment you look at an old world map and your heart aches for a place called Tartaria, in that moment your schooling is over, the memory prison door swings open. The knowing is not something you learn, it's something you unforget. Thank you for walking through the ruins of the prison with me. The bell doesn't ring here, you're free to go.